as part of National Invasive Species Awareness Week. My name is Chris Evans, and I am Vice Chair of the National Association of Invasive Plant Councils. We are sponsoring 5 different webinars this week, one each day at 3 p.m. Eastern. So this first one is on landscape scale invasive plant control projects. If you're interested, tomorrow, Tuesday, Laura Van Riper from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources is presenting on a great educational program called Play Clean Go. Wednesday, Nancy Lowenstein from Auburn University is talking about a national initiative for building a standard for invasive plant listings. That's something that NAIPSI is heavily involved in. Thursday, Chuck Bargeron from the University of Georgia's Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health is going to be talking about EdMaps, which is an online mapping service, some smartphone apps that you can use to deal with invasive species, and then the newly redone National Invasive Species Mapping Standards. And then we're ending up these webinar series on Friday with Lee Greenwood from the Nature Conservancy, and she's going to be talking about the Don't Move Firewood campaign. So I hope all of you can attend one or more of these other webinars. Today, our focus is on landscape scale invasive plant control projects. And this is actually going to be 3 mini presentations. We're going to have start out with Nick Seaton and Caleb Grantham from the Nature Conservancy talking about the Southern Illinois Invasive Species Strike Team. And then Cheryl Millett from the Nature Conservancy is going to be talking about the Central Florida Lygodium Strategy. And then we're going to end up with Carmen Chapin from the National Park Service talking about the Great Lakes Exotic Plant Management Team. All of these deal with how do you address invasive species on a scale larger than one piece of land. So I'm really excited about it. We're going to hold questions to the end, and then we're going to have a question and answer period and a panel discussion. But anytime during the presentation, if you do have a question, you can type it in to the question or the chat box there on the panel on your screen, and then we'll get to it at the end. So with that, I want to go ahead and get us started. Our first presenters is going to be Nick Seaton and Caleb Grantham.
Hello, are you able to hear us?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. All right, well, we are the Southern Illinois Invasive Species Strike Team, Caleb Grantham, and I'm Nick Seaton. Our program is all about the collaborative effort. It's funded through a split grant between the following partners: Fish and Wildlife Service, the Nature Conservancy, NIFWIF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the River Cooperative Weed Management Area, and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. So why do we treat these areas? It's a 2-man team that assists with the mapping, monitoring, controlling of exotic invasive species in state dedicated nature reserves, state parks, and adjacent private lands that could serve as pathways onto these properties within the southern 11 counties of Illinois. Southern Illinois is incredibly unique due to the convergence of 4 physiographic regions, as seen on the image below. These divisions are the Ozark Division, the Lower Mississippi River Bottomlands Division, the Shawnee Hills Division, and the Coastal Plain Division. And in the photo next, you can see a photographic description of each one of these. Our project area consists of 37 natural areas in the 11 most southern counties of Illinois, working on both state and federal land and adjacent private lands. And our priorities are actually based on the following factors. This is what we base all of our work on. The severity of the threat to the high quality natural area and rare species. So what species are there and what type of landscape is it? The extent of the targeted infestation, the probability of success for control and potential restoration. Since we're a two-man team, sometimes you have to weigh that out. And then opportunities for public involvement, maybe having a community pulled together. And then also the park commitment to the follow-up monitoring and treatment. Types of treatments we do are chemical, mechanical, manual, and prescribed fire. And chemical, you can see below, we do foliar with backpack sprayers. We have slide-in ATV pumps, truck-mounted pumps. We do basil bark. You can see an application on autumn olive in the image in the top right. We do cut stem. We'll cut with a chainsaw, and then you spray the cambium layer. And then you can see on the bottom right, here's a foliar treatment on stilt grass using an ATV pump unit. And again, here's some more examples. This is using a brush cutter on bush honeysuckle, and then we'll put herbicide on the cambium layer after it's been cut. And here's a photo of Caleb using a chainsaw to remove some Bradford pear on a nature conservancy owned property. Here's an example of prescribed fire, like after the use. We've only prescribed fire to cover, wide distance of acreage on a small amount of time, since we're just a two-man team. Work with IDNR heritage biologists and other ILFO staff to. Here's that floristic response to prescribed fire later in the spring. And then in addition to prescribed fire, we also are given the opportunity to treat on private land treat on kudzu for people that are unable to afford the herbicide. It's kind of a pricey chemical that is used, the milestone, and so being able to go out and treat these properties is something that we really think is a great advantage to us. And then we also try to maintain a constant revision of all of our GIS mapping technology. This is done with the help from the Nature Conservancy and also the IDNR staff. A 10.2 on our laptops, and then also we've started using iPads just this all over. So when we go in,
Hey, Nick and Caleb, your audio's cutting out a little bit. We're having a hard time hearing you here. Hey, Nick and Caleb, we can't. Your audio's cut out. We can't hear you right now.
all right, can you hear us again?
Yes, yeah, now we can hear you. Great, thanks.
All right, sorry, we just keep on getting booted there. So what we do is we treat all the plants based on the phenological chart here. By taking detailed phenology notes in the field, we're able to compile those into these like plant treatment calendars with help from the river-to-river crop weeds management area that better allow us to plan future treatment times when the plant's more susceptible to chemical treatment. And a cornerstone principle of the invasive species strike team is the early detection and rapid response. It's a very cost-effective way to manage invasive species. This tactic requires strong networking through partnering agencies and continuous surveillance of these sensitive areas. Applying this early detection and rapid response approach to invasive species management greatly improves the likelihood that invasions will be addressed. Here's a good example of an EDRR that we went on, and those two gray areas on the map show where the actual microspecium was found, but the reconnaissance throughout the creek, and this is true for all of the EDRs that we are called out on, we try to do an extreme reconnaissance throughout the entire area just to make sure that we got every last individual plant. Here's seeing we were contacted by the Forest Service to go to a Spencer Barron's natural area, and you can see white sleep clover growing on the roadside. And here it is just a few days later after we And here's another example of an EDRR. This is at Giant City State Park. And we had a EDR for kudzu at Giant City. Here's pictures prior to treatment here. Here's kind of just the canopy level and the threats that kudzu can impose on native plants. And so then, in addition to mapping and removing these invasive species, both Caleb and I really keep an eye out for threatened and endangered species found on our nature reserves. If any of these are actually found, we try to take photos, record the GPS coordinates, and submit an EOR form to the IDNR to help update their heritage biology database. In 2014, we submitted 2 EOR forms, timber rattlesnake and blue sage, as you can see here. Here's a photo of the blue sage. So from January 2014 to January 15th, our annual progress, we surveyed and treated 2,691.53 acres of invasive plants, including 20 species and 37 natural areas. We had 393 acres of chemical treatment, we had roughly 53 acres of manual, and 2,245 of prescribed fire. And this is just kind of a breakdown of all the species and the acreage that were treated for each one throughout the entire year of 2014 field season. This is a chart of our details, our timeline we keep to show our breakdown of all our time allotted for each individual action of the job and titles. And our control was comprised 45% of our total time. And so some of our highlights, the work is done on nature reserves and state managed lands and private lands. There's rigorous field testing of the weed information management system and also the collector app that we're going to be using. Early detection and rapid response is a cornerstone part of the entire program. We provide detailed maps of density of the infestations. We're treating high priority invasive species in natural areas. We prepare detailed resource reports, and there's an annual report of our strike team activities. It was just conducted in the end of January. It highlights all our work done through the last field season. And this report can be found on the CWMA website.
All righty. Thanks a bunch, guys. We're going to just jump right into our next presentation. Again, we'll have all time for question and answers at the end. But our next presenter is Cheryl Millett, and she's going to be talking about the Central Florida Lygodium strategy.
I am. So I'm talking about the Central Florida Lygodium strategy as an example of a landscape scale invasive plant control program. And I'm Cheryl Millett, the coordinator of the program with the Nature Conservancy. And I work closely on this project with Christina Serbisoff-King of the Nature Conservancy and Christine Campbell of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission on this project. And the University of Florida's IFAS Extension Service says there are 3 strikes against Old World climbing fern. The Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council considers Old World climbing fern to be invasive. Old World climbing fern is also regulated by laws of the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services as a Florida noxious weed, and it's also regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture as a federal noxious weed. So the conclusion is it may be one of the most serious threats to Florida's natural areas. And here on this slide, you can see how it can cover and smother whole swaths of native vegetation. A frond, I'm hoping you're not seeing this little, okay, gone. A frond can grow and twine to 90 feet long, and here you can see it just covers the vegetation. Not sure why I'm not advancing to the next slide. Because I have a lovely picture that you definitely want to see. But I can tell you a little bit about it first. Old World climbing fern was available as a horticultural plant, and it actually was sold through catalogs in Florida from, or in the South from 1888 to 1930. And it was first reported in natural areas in southeast Florida in 1965 and in central Florida in 1973. And it's an invasive non-native vine that is a rapid vegetative spreader into hardwood and cypress swamps and flatwoods in southern and central Florida. It's native to wet tropical and subtropical regions of Asia, Africa, and Australia, and it can also grow in drier habitats. And many animals will not use areas in this condition that you see here on the screen, which may significantly reduce game populations and therefore hunting value. And since it's a true fern, it reproduces through millions of minute spores. So not only does it grow quickly vegetatively, but it can produce up to 28,500 spores per fertile leaflet. And each one of those 90-foot fronds is composed of many leaflets. So that's the incredible spore source that you find with Old World climbing fern. And as you see on the bottom of the screen here, it can grow in very remote and undisturbed areas. And so that is also a problem. And here you can see some other problems with Old World climbing fern. In addition to smothering understory and canopy trees, it can alter fire ecology, carrying fire into the crown, where it can have more catastrophic impacts than if this latter fuel weren't there. And the above ground stem in a fern, this is the rachis, is wiry and quickly forms these thick horizontal and vertical mats. And here on the right side of the screen, you see a thick mat of plant material on the ground. And as you can imagine, nothing is really growing from underneath that. But you may note that spores can resprout or can sprout from on top of that rachis mat. So it provides a great substrate for continuing the old world climbing fern infestation, even after treatment. And so what we have is the Central Florida Lygodium strategy, which has a goal of creating an old world climbing fern free zone across Central Florida. And we're trying to prevent its northward spread. We're also a strategic program, and we seek to try and stay north of infestations, striving for early detection and rapid response. And we coordinate the needs of public and private landowners and managers to share the work and funding to accomplish that on a landscape scale. And we also seek to detect and remove old world climbing fern on private lands, and that's part of where the great funding comes that works for the Central Florida Lygodium Strategy program. And this program aims to cross boundaries in, you might say, true invasive species fashion. But the Central Florida Lygodium Strategy is, above all, a partnership, and it involves conservation management groups, federal, state, and local governmental agencies and private landowners across the landscape. And direct funds have been awarded through the Southwest Florida Water Management District, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program, also their private stewardship grant program, a USDA Cooperative Forest Health Program grant that was administered by the Florida Forest Service back when they were called the Florida Division of Forestry, and also through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and generous private donors who have asked to remain anonymous. And equally important are the matching funds and in-kind services that have been generated through many partners, including the Florida Department of Protection, Bureau of Invasive Plant Management, and Southwest and South Florida Water Management Districts, among others. And one of the main things we work on is trying to find old world climbing fern, even though I've shown you some worst case scenarios where it's very obvious. It starts off as small infestations, and that's when we're trying to capture it. And this finding it can be one of the biggest challenges of this program. And we've done this a lot through aerial surveys, which have been tremendously helpful in finding remote infestations. And we also do this through outreach to partners, particularly through CISMAs, or Cooperative Invasive Species Management Areas, in the target zone, and by encouraging reporting through EDMAPs. And now I know you're going to hear more about EDMAPs from Chuck Bargeron on Thursday. And we do this also through partners surveying at least annually at sentinel sites along the northern zone. And I'll tell you more about that in a moment. The other part, after we find it, is we want to kill it. And I said that there is currently funding that the Nature Conservancy receives to work on private lands in the area of the northern known infestations to treat old world climbing fern, either through staff, which happens less frequently. That's only for small infestations and small areas to survey, or contractors, which is what happens most often. But the most important part of this slide may be the note at the bottom. I could tell you how we treat it. Basically, it's poodle cut if it's growing up in the tree, and then spray everything on the ground with herbicide. But the most important part is the retreatment, because there can be great underground plant stores that can resprout. And as I mentioned before, spores can create new plants on the dead material. So retreatment is key. And that's part of what we've built into the program. Another new tool for the toolbox that we're especially hopeful about and may be especially useful in areas where repeated herbicide treatment may not be practical is this biocontrol moth, the NISAW moth. I'm not going to read the entire scientific name because I'll mutilate it. But this little demure moth can do the damage that you see on the right-hand side with all of the brown vegetation. And it's being released as caterpillars through the USDA Agricultural Research Service. And last year, we actually received some where it says soon here on this map, showing it at the northernmost release point. We released that last year on a private property that it has very difficult to treat substrate. And we're hoping to see how successful that's been very soon. And that's a picture of Christine Campbell actually releasing it last year. You can see we need help at that site. So we're hoping that the biocontrol can be helpful. And this shows the northern expansion zone of Old World Climbing Fern from, if you know Central Florida, northern Hillsborough County, northeast to Volusia County, where the private lands initiative of the Nature Conservancy, with current funding from the Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program in Southwest Florida Water Management District, is focusing on treating private lands to make for a cross-boundary sweep in collaboration with public land managers who are working on their properties. And the yellow is that priority zone. The yellow dots are Old World Climbing Fern reports from EdMaps, our great source for Old World Climbing Fern infestations. And the red dots with swirls are where we have treated private properties or are in the process of treating right now. And this also shows the two outliers way up in the north in the gray area in Duval and St. Johns County in northern Florida, both of which are being monitored and treated by the First Coast Invasives Working Group. But we'll note those because I'll get back to that too. And I've also got green triangles on here. I've got lots of things going on. There's a lot to show. The green triangles show the hot off the helicopter results of the Southwest Florida Water Management District's and Polk County Mosquito Control's aerial surveys, all of which will be ground truthed and treated. And the orange push pins are our check of effectiveness, the 130 sentinel sites. And those are points on invasible habitat on public lands at the northernmost part of the priority zone that are monitored every 6 to 12 months to assess if they have become infested with Old World Climbing Fern. If so, they would be immediately treated. If there were few to no hits on those sentinel sites, we would consider we are doing well at holding the line. And also to assess the northward spread, we also contact public land managers in the priority zone and north to ask for sighting reports. And I mentioned that public land managers are treating infestations on their lands as part of this landscape level project. Another new tool is the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's Uplands program has an early detection rapid response strike team to treat infestations on public conservation land that include Lygodium, Kogan grass, or an EDRR species that's identified by the local SISMA. It has to be small with a maximum project size of 10 acres, and it has to have easy site access. But that's a complement to the other invasive plant management work they do on public lands through that Uplands program. So in assessing how this project is going, well, you know, you could think about it in different ways. Is it a glass half full or half empty? If you want, you could think of it as a failure because our goal was to create an Old World Climbing Free Zone across Central Florida, and that has not happened because we have found it on our fire break. And we've also set a goal of preventing the northward spread, and that's not happened either because we have found it in those two locations that jumped the line in Duval and St. Johns County. But you could think of it as a success because as a strategic program, we aim to stay north of Old World Climbing Fern, and maybe we think we have to a great extent, except for those two outlier points. But that is still to be seen because we still need more information, and I'll talk about that in just a second. We are working on public and private lands, and we've been very successful at reaching out to private landowners and treating on their properties. And have we been able to detect and remove Old World Climbing Fern? Yes. But our vision for the future, we have an informal steering committee for our project, and we have all agreed to continue this approach and partnership. And we would like to develop a more effective and efficient partnership. The Florida Forest Service is stepping up to manage the Sentinel site monitoring, and they are also conducting some of that monitoring on one of the largest public lands. Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has stepped up by offering a position where half of the time helps with field work and contractor compliance on this project. But we still need aerial surveys on the central East Coast to get a better sense of what is going on there, and we also need to ramp up submittal of sighting data, ideally via EDMAPs from our many partners out there. So what we see in the future is more outreach and surveying and continuing to do the on-the-ground work. That's the end of my presentation.
Great. Thanks a ton, Cheryl.
Thank you.
We're holding questions to the end, but if you have questions, feel free to type it into the question bar on the webinar there, and we'll get to them at the end. But we're going to jump right into our final presentation, which is Carmen Chapin, and she's going to be talking about the Great Lakes Exotic Plant Management Team.
Okay, I'm on audio. And let's see. Chris, can you see my screen?
Yeah, now we can.
Super. All right. So my name is Carmen Chapin, and I'm with the National Park Service, and I'm the coordinator for the Great Lakes Exotic Plant Management Team. Many of you know somewhat about the Exotic Plant Management Program within the National Park Service, so I'll give a little bit of an overview about that, but then sort of focus on how we've structured landscape management of invasive species within my region, which is the Western Great Lakes. All right, and of course, we're experiencing some technical difficulty here. There we go. So the exotic plant management teams, we exist, as do most drug teams, as mobile units. We're here to augment park efforts, and we operate as separate units to provide site-specific strategies. So throughout the United States, there are about 17 different units, and we all work with a suite of parks. Most of them have sort of similar ecosystems, which help us work in those environments. Once we get to a park, we are self-contained and self-directed. We do spend a lot of time in the off-season planning our efforts with park management in dealing with things such as compliance and permitting and all those wonderful things involved in invasive species management. A lot of what we do out in the field is specialized. We work with things that are typical biological technicians and seasonals aren't capable of doing in their short terms for Park Service employment. A lot of what we do is chainsaw use, We work with some large area spray equipment, slip-on sprayers. We do a fair amount of aquatic application, and we're often given some of the more challenging landscapes to work in that the parks typically can't get to. There's a picture of our vehicle and all of our equipment. As I mentioned, there are 17 different programs throughout the United States, and we serve a suite of parks. Each of us serves a suite of parks. Not all of the parks within the National Park Service are covered. Some of these parks are small cultural sites that do not warrant attention of a large strike team, but we are willing to work with all of the Park Service units out there. Within the Great Lakes, we have 10 different parks that we work with, and this covers a really large area. Everything from Voyageurs National Park and Isle Royale to the north, to Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore to the south, and Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore to the east. So a variety of habitats, a variety of growing conditions, and a variety of growing seasons, which makes it a little challenging. In addition to the large geographical area that we cover, within those Park Service units, we have over 1 million acres that we're responsible for, which contains a mosaic of different ecosystems, as well as a host of different species that inhabit those ecosystems, from hybrid cattail and phragmites to some of our dual species and more temperate species that we see in places like Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore. Within each of these parks, we have different levels of infestation. You can imagine a park such as Isle Royale, our infestation levels are relatively low, and we're dealing with only a handful of species. But places such as Sleeping Bear Dunes and Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore, invasive species might be up to 50% of the plant species that exist in those parks. So it's really a wide range of challenges. So the question is how do we prioritize what we do with so many moving targets? And there are several ranking tools that can be used, and some of these parks use these ranking tools internally, and here's a list of them. Many of you are familiar with all of these, but all of them are very difficult for us to use across such a large landscape. Many, many, many states and many different growing zones and different environments. And so we found that with a traditional plan of attack, where we're trying to do initial control of one species at a specific site, and the following year we do a retreatment and then move on to another site. Eventually, after a decade of doing invasive species work, we find that we are no longer able to keep up with the number of sites and the number of species that we're trying to treat. And so how do we prioritize within all of that? A good example of this is common buckthorn, which can easily overwhelm all of us. And it is an early detection species in some of our parks. Voyageurs National Park, we found, I think, 1 plant of buckthorn. We have yet to encounter it at Isle Royale. But in many of our other parks, it's quite ubiquitous across the landscape. So we've gone to a different strategy in how we manage our invasive species within these national park units, and that it's not what we're controlling, but what we are protecting. And so we've gone back to look at what makes these National Park Service units special, and that is in documentation of our enabling legislation. We also have what we call significant resources and values, whether those are plant habitat, animal habitat, or reasons why the visitors come to the park. It might be a view shed, it might be a landscape, it might be a chance for a different type of activity, and we look at those in terms of making the decisions on how we plan for our operations. And so when we go through and we work in these park units, our highest priority are those things that are considered fundamental resources and values for the park. They were created for the the native forests, or for the moving sand dunes, or for the pockets of rare species, whatever it may be, that's what we focus on in those parks. We look at critical habitat, and those would be habitat for teeny species or species of special concern that weren't part of the enabling legislation. We look at high quality habitat, and that's something that's hard to describe, but we all know it when we see it. And we also look, as many of the other teams do, as to a commitment for ongoing preservation. We know that once we go in, it's sort of a lifetime commitment to keep those areas as well cared for as possible. We also do work with true EDRR species, and typically those are species with fewer than 100 plants in the area. And if something like that hits our list, we are willing to go out and to work on a control strategy for that species, even though it may not be in one of our high priority areas. Some of our lower priority areas that we do pay attention to, but aren't as important to us as our fundamental resources and values, would also be those vector points, campgrounds, trailheads, areas of ongoing restoration, where it's a long, slow process, as well as places that we know have thriving levels of invasives. If we have 100 acres of Phragmites, we have 100 acres of Phragmites, and it's a long commitment that could easily take all of our resources away from some of our high priority areas. So in answering, are we really doing landscape level invasive plant control? Yes, in some of these cases we are. There are certain species that we focus on, and certain environments that we care about, but not all of them. We certainly are not going on a species by species hit list of what we're working on. It's very much a site-by-site management question. And the follow-up question is, should we be controlling species at a landscape level? And I would agree that we do still need to have focus on those early detection rapid response species. But I think a programmatic approach to a species level control effort has the ability, at least for us, across such a large geographic span and with so many acres, that we can lose sight of what makes us the National Park Service. And so we do to some extent, but it's not how we manage our program. And with that, I'll leave you of some of the things that we do protect, and this is hepatica, which is spring, and it's a long way off here for us in northern Wisconsin. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Carmen. So hope everybody's been entering in a lot of questions into our chat. And before I hand it over to Chuck, who's our technology guru, to read out those questions, I wanted to start with the first question, and I really hope that all four of our presenters, all of our panelists here can address it. And the thing that I was wanting to ask is, you guys are out in the field, you're in varying places, you're at one place one day and then maybe another place another day. And so I think you have the opportunity to really interact with the public at a higher level than somebody that's just at one place. And I'm just interested in when you get questions from the public, I mean, are people receptive to what you're doing? Is it an interesting discussion? I mean, how are those interactions with the public been for you guys?
Well, this is Cheryl, and as far as the Central Florida Lygodium Strategy Project has worked, almost, I would say more than 99% of the private landowners that we talk with are very receptive. May not start off that way, but are very receptive as we continue our conversation. And the only one that I haven't been able to have a productive conversation with ended up being not in our priority zone. So it worked out okay, I guess. But the other thing that comes out through having these conversations is we're focusing on one project, and we get a lot of questions from people about how do I treat this other invasive, or are there resources to help with that? And so it's a way that we can connect people with their resources that are available through the Extension Service and other resources for private landowners. So it's been very positive that way. It's very time intensive also.
This is Carmen, and I will add that things have really changed over the last 10 years. Now we're out with the crew and backpack sprayers or whatever we're doing. Typically, people ask us if we're treating a specific species. They'll ask, are you treating spotted knapweed? Before they would wonder what we're doing. Now they know we're doing invasive species management and can probably name 2 or 3 species that we might be out there working on. We've added to that by really enhancing and increasing the amount of interpretation we do about invasive species in our national parks. Part of that is because as much as we are out there and doing good work on the ground, we're not going to win the war if all of our visitors continue to bring in species into the park. So we're really working on a message of education and prevention in those park units as well.
This is Nick, and I would say it varies for us too. Sometimes we'll have someone that's kind of angered with us, but what Caleb and I try to do is just to educate and let them know what we're doing and tell them the priority of the species to be removed.
All righty, great. Thanks, everybody. We're going to open it up now to questions from the audience, and I'm going to hand over control of this to Chuck then, since he's the guy that can read the questions.
Yeah, and we've got 19 questions, I think. So I'm just going to read them in the order that they were put in. So if you are just putting a question in, it may be a few minutes before we get to yours. And Nick, I think this was partly when we lost you. The first question was, I thought WIMS was obsolete, so is it still being used? And I think you mentioned WIMS, and then you mentioned the iPads, and if you could just, and that's when we lost the audio.
Yeah, it is obsolete, and it's kind of being taken away. What we're trying to do now is use, because WIMS was actually it was a good working program. It was just there's no IT support anymore. So anytime we would run into a problem, there's no support at all. So what we're doing now with the Collector app is a lot of the tables from the original WIMS database. We're trying to transfer them over so that we still have the the functionality of WIMS, but in a more updated program. I hope that, I'm not sure if that answers the question or not. I hope so.
Yeah, and the Collector runs on iPads and iPhones, and I guess Android devices as well, right?
Yeah, and so that'll give us the opportunity to be able to share our maps just in a much larger area.
Okay, the next question, I guess, is to y'all as well. What is the regrowth of invasives following the prescribed fire treatment?
Well, it would vary between species. With Lespedeza and Microspecium, typically what you try to do is get that pre-treated before we would do a prescribed fire.
And the next question is, and I think you'll address this briefly with Chris's question, but just to make sure, are there programs to educate private landowners not near the natural areas to recognize and control invasives? And that was specifically for the first presentation.
Could you repeat that question?
Are there programs to educate landowners that are nearby or even farther away from some of the areas on invasives as part of what y'all were doing with the strike team?
Yeah, the River Cooperative Weed Management, Carla Gage, that really helps to educate the public, all private landowners, and
she can hold like weekend conventions where you can go and get educated. You can get your control techniques and
identification.
Yeah, little things like that.
Okay, and the next question, and this will wrap up the initial questions for y'all's presentation. Is there any interest in predictive mapping, such as species distribution models, in order to aid in predicting where you need to control species of interest in Southern Illinois? So if y'all had predictive maps, would that, and models, would that be helpful?
Yeah, I would say that would be very helpful, and it would maybe help us be able to prioritize our sites in the future too. If we were able to kind of pinpoint where the next infestation would be, that would be a great resource. Yeah.
Has any, I guess, I'll ask a follow-up, has that been looked at all, or not from y'all's group?
Not by us, no. But sounds like other people are, yeah.
Okay, the next question is for Cheryl. It is, have you considered hyperspectral remote sensing in addition to your other methods for detection?
Yes, we have, and actually we had a private company offer their services. This was several years ago, so it is something that we could revisit, but they put some significant time and effort into looking for a signature for old world climbing fern, and even though when we look at it in GIS, we can see it, it's not easy to detect with any kind of algorithm. So it has not worked so far, but I'm not giving up on the idea. Maybe things have improved since then. So if anybody has any connections with that, I'd love to hear about it.
The next question, and I'm not going to butcher the name, but I guess, does the biocontrol agent not eat the native Lygodium?
The native Lygodium palmatum, it comes from Maine down to Georgia, I believe. It isn't down here in Florida, and I'm not sure what the results were in testing whether it eats Lygodium palmatum. I would assume that it would not be released if it does, but the ranges don't overlap at all right now, so that wouldn't be an issue. They haven't traveled that far from where they've been put either.
Okay. Are drones used to monitor infestations of Lygodium?
That is a great question. I have a private landowner we worked with who grows sugarcane in South Florida and suggested we use drones. One of the issues is we use the aerial surveys for areas that are more remote, and so the distance that the drone could travel for us is not great enough. I'd be delighted to pursue that as a possibility for the future, though. I think that is something that could help us, especially in areas where we don't have the helicopter survey capability. Again, if anybody has any resources for that, I'd love to hear about it.
So next question is, do you feel that Lygodium, the listing of Lygodium as a federal noxious weed, is essential in being able to get resources to address the species?
I think it's very helpful, and it's also helpful to keep it from spreading elsewhere. When we first started working on this program, you could Google Old World Climbing Fern and find some companies that were selling it as a horticultural plant in Texas. And so not having that something that's being sold in other places is helpful for preventing this problem elsewhere. Having it listed as a noxious weed does make it a higher priority for funding agencies, so that does help with money.
And another question, kind of a follow-up on the biocontrol question. Is the moth native to Florida? Does it feed exclusively on Old World climbing fern? is there concern about it feeding and damaging native plants?
It isn't native to Florida, and actually I can't remember where this one came from, but it's from where Old World climbing fern is native, so from the Old World. And it has to go through a rigorous testing process to see if it will feed exclusively on Old World climbing fern. It actually feeds also on another invasive climbing fern we have in Florida, Japanese climbing fern. So that's okay. And they have to make sure that it will not feed on native plants. So it goes through a rigorous testing program where they are offered choice of close relatives in captivity before they ever come to the release point.
Okay. To jump back to the first presentation, the question is, what's the source of funding to work on private lands? Is it a specific grant targeted to private lands? And I'll add to that, how do you prioritize locations and how do you choose your treatment locations? Because that's kind of two questions, but you might can address them both at the same time.
Yeah, well, the NIFWIF Pulling Together Initiative may provide grants to manage invasive species management, and they're intended to help support the creation of local cooperative weed management partnerships. And then the major funding for those Pulling Together initiatives are provided by the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and USDA Forest Service.
So once you've gotten the money, how do you determine which private lands to prioritize?
Well, on private lands, we really only do treat kudzu on the general of our private lands due to the cost of the chemical, and then we have a big 200-gallon cube in the back of our truck that we have a 100-foot extension hose that we can go in and kind of treat all that when they wouldn't have any kind of funding for that equipment at all, and the chemical. So we kind of just do the kudzu sites, and kind of those are really our only focus on solely private lands, unless it is adjacent to the nature reserve.
Okay. And so I've got a few. Well, I want to switch over to Carmen, and then I'll come back to some of the general questions. So Carmen, for the NPS teams, do you work across boundaries with other agencies or private lands? If not, is this something that's being considered? Could increase crew size with increased funding?
Some of our teams in other areas work across boundaries. Out west, where there's a lot of BLM land, there's a lot of work that happens off Park Service lands. We have a very short growing season, and so we don't have as much opportunity to do so, but we do work particularly where there's land adjacent to Park Service land. There might be state DNR land that we work with. We work with the tribes that are adjacent to some of our lands, and we all are active in our communities with cooperative weed management areas. The Park Service is a big player in many of those throughout our region, and so we do work that way, but our teams don't work specifically on private lands.
So another question for you, Carmen, can you give us some species that would be controlled throughout your different protected areas on the landscape level because of their traits, etc.?
I think that wild parsnip is one of them that we're seeing in the southern reaches. Our old field areas is becoming more and more prevalent, but we're also seeing it in places like Isle Royale, where it's being brought in by campers and backpackers, and so and it's sort of been vacant in between in the parks in between That's one of those that we're very concerned about because of the visitor contact, and where it tends to show up is trailheads and parking lots and campgrounds. And so that is one that we're managing on a landscape level. Other species such as buckthorn and honeysuckle are just too ubiquitous for us to take an all or nothing approach to it. So it's really, those species are managed on a site-by-site basis. I would say other species that we're really concerned about on a landscape level would be the knotweeds, the Japanese bohemian and giant knotweeds. And if I had to pick a third, I might say, I don't know, I don't think I could come up with a third one that we trade at all of our parks right now.
So another question along those lines, since campgrounds are known for, or a known conduit for exotics, do you think they'll become a priority site to curb the transfer of exotics?
Some of them are. We do a lot of education and prevention at our campgrounds, where we have a lot of messaging up that goes up at those campgrounds. One of the things that we do have at a lot of our trailheads in the National Park Service are boot brushes, and so we're stopping the spread right there. One of the biggest issues that we have about campgrounds is actually treating them, because they tend to be full of people. So we do some hand pulls when we can. We get volunteer groups to work at them, but you know, the overall spray it down, turn it brown, it's hard for us to do when there's such high visitor use areas.
Okay, and we got this. I think it's a good question. There's a couple of good questions that I think maybe everybody can address. So the first one is, what is your idea of a success stories with a species, site, or landscape? And do you have any examples of specific success stories? So I guess we can start with Illinois and then move through on whether you have any good success stories.
Yeah, one of our successes are a Chinese yam, Dioscrea oppositifolia, over at Kincaid Lake, Stowaway. We did 3 years treatment over there, and on our last reconnaissance, there was actually none found. So definite success story over there. And then
yeah, same could be for one of our kudzu sites at DeSoto Municipal Park behind the baseball field. There was a kudzu outbreak there, and since 2009, we went back this past summer, and it was completely eradicated too. So there are some sites that we are definitely seeing some progress in.
This is Cheryl, and I guess with the old world climbing fern, I'm not going to talk about that since I mentioned that in the presentation, but I think a lot of our SISMAs are focusing more on EDRR species, and one in the Heartland SISMA area that I work in Central Florida is coral ardesia. That's a big problem further north from us. And a few years ago, we had 3 infestations showed up on state properties, and we organized some partner and volunteer work days to go out and treat them, to collect the berries, and then the park staff went back afterwards to spray the plants and to check on them again. And that was another retreatment project. So it was 1, 2, 3 treatments, 2 of them herbicide. They have not seen it come back. So that's been a success story. I think the key is that it's small and not very widespread. And I think that would be the key for any species.
This is Carmen, and I would second that. We've had some really great successes with population eradication at the Apostle Islands with purple loosestrife. We've treated it for a couple of years in some of our inner island wetlands, and we've pretty much removed it from the landscape there. And there were a few small populations at Apostle Islands of purple loosestrife that are no longer existing. Another great success we had was in some old fields that we're trying to restore near the Ice Age complex outside of Madison. And these were old farm fields that are in brome, planted brome. And the only invasive that we had in there were Canada thistle, despite the surrounding ag fields. But we went in there and for several years treated Canada thistle, and now they're in very, very good condition, just ready to be replanted with native grasses and wildflowers.
Okay. One more question that I think is a good general question. Do any of your programs make data on species treated and whether those species were threatened or endangered species publicly available online?
For the National Park Service, all of our treatment data where we've treated is available through our data clearinghouse. However, it's not necessarily related to T&E species.
I would say that's the same for the Central Florida Lygodium strategy. We just we share our infestation and treatment data and not other species information data.
Yeah, and for us, all of our data is stored on our computers, and as we were talking earlier with the collector app, we can share all of our data, but we actually have to like click and say we're going to share it with the person. And all of our treatment history is available on the River Cooperative Weed Management website as well. Our entire 2014 annual report can be seen there.
Then we've got a few questions just about public fears of chemical herbicide use, whether you get any objections to the use of herbicides in natural areas, and then what kind of objections do you get?
I have a recent example. This is Cheryl again, and there are lots of different reasons why people may be reluctant to work with us, from having strangers on their property to having herbicides applied. And so a lot of what we end up doing is getting to know each other and what are each other's concerns and what are areas of commonality. We had a dairy producer that we recently did the first treatment on his property, and his concern was, is the herbicide going to affect the quality of the milk in his cows? And so we actually worked together with the Cattlemen's Association to get what was their opinion of the impact of the herbicide treatment on their cows, and the decision was that it would not affect them where we were treating. And so we came to a good resolution by bringing in an outside arbiter that was an authority that they approved of, rather than believe me. So that's a lot of what we do too.
And most of, this is Nick, most of our objections come when we're treating off of a right-of-way alongside a road. One site that comes to mind is the Simpson Barrens, owned by the Forest Service, and there's a fairly listed Meads milkweed on the barren, and one objection was someone drove by and mentioned honeybees, that they liked the white sweet clover that we were spraying, and we basically just had to educate him and let him know that it could potentially encroach onto the Meads milkweed population and really impact that. So most of our encounters are usually when we're doing rights of way spraying, and otherwise we're usually within the nature preserve, pretty far away from the public.
And this is Carmen. We do have interaction with the public, and a lot of it is education based for people who have concerns. We do try to point out that not everything we do is a chemical application. We do a fair amount of hand pulling of garlic mustard and other types of control work that aren't chemically based. But for some species, it is quite necessary to use an herbicide application for effective control. And we explain why and what we're trying to protect.
Okay, and if anybody else has a question, I've got a few more that are already in here, but we want to try to wrap this up in the next few minutes. So if you have another question that you haven't entered, go ahead and type that in. So one question, and this is kind of another general one, are you hopeful? Do you find simply removing the plants is enough, or do you need to replant with natives for the invasives not to take over again?
I would say it would be really helpful if we were able to spread seed after, because we're creating openings within the area, so definitely would make it easier for the invasive plants to come back into that spot. But if we were spreading seed, it would definitely help. Although we are not practicing that right now, though.
Yeah, this is Carmen, and for a lot of our large-scale efforts where we're treating a lot of contiguous acres, we do need some sort of restoration effort, a reseeding, for example, to happen for healthy vegetation populations.
I would agree with that, and I would say also that we're not currently doing any restoration other than that initiated by the private landowners, but I think it would be a good idea in some cases. And where I mentioned that we put the biocontrol moth out, the reason why we chose the location we did for that is that it's a place that was an old sand mine location from back before there had to be mitigation afterwards, and so there are these tailings left behind that are great breeding grounds for invasive species, and we could spend all the money in the world treating resprouting invasive species in those areas. I've come to the conclusion that that's not the best way for us to prioritize spending our funds, and so using the moss to try and keep down the spore source from those areas that are really bears to treat is a better approach. That's why I'm also hoping that the moss will really take off there.
And the final questions, I guess somebody mentioned a poodle cut at some point, and
that was me.
And they wanted to know what a poodle cut was.
A poodle cut is for the old world climbing fern that climbs up and over the trees, so it could be 90 feet up in the air. You can't spray herbicide over your head like that and expect it to be effective and not cause any problems for you. So what we do is cut the vine all the way around the tree so that it's completely separated from the ground, push down the material that is rooted in the ground, and then spray what's on the ground and rooted. And so everything up in the tree is no longer rooted and will die up there.
And the final question was, I'm coming across a pokeberry problem. What is the best way to get rid of it?
Well, we could say that pokeberry is a native species, so it's probably not something that most of us dealing with these exotic invasives handle on a day-to-day basis.
I like pokeberry.
So is that all the questions, Chuck?
Yes. I mean, we got a comment that the Southern Illinois CWMA was doing a good job on education, and we got a comment that pokeberry is a good wildlife food.
Great. All righty.
I'm sorry, we had one more question. Is IMAP invasives being used as a resource to find where invasive species are located?
I mentioned for the Lygodium strategy we use EdMaps, and that's where we get all our data.
All righty. Well, I think with that, that's a great place to end it. I want to thank everybody for attending this and remind them to please check out the National Invasive Species Awareness Week website and look at the upcoming webinars the rest of the week and consider attending some more of them. So thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.